I'm disappointed in President Putin because I thought we would have had a deal 2 months ago, but it doesn't seem to get there. So based on that, we're going to be doing secondary tariffs if we don't have a deal in 50 days. It's very simple. And they'll be at 100%. And that's the way it is.
Is the war in Ukraine reshaping the existing global order? Because Donald Trump's threat of secondary tariffs on Russia is not just bad news for India. It's also what's creating the great divide between two world groupings, the BRICS and NATO. Because the US president has threatened to impose 100% secondary tariffs on countries trading with Russia. Only exception being if Moscow agrees to end the war in Ukraine within 50 days. That Trump is unhappy with Russia's lack of progress towards a peace deal is an open secret. The US president has already expressed his displeasure alongside NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte at the White House.
You're very unhappy, I am, with Russia, but we'll discuss that maybe a different day. But we're very, very unhappy with them, and we're going to be doing very severe tariffs if we don't have a deal in 50 days. Tariffs at about 100%. You'd call them secondary tariffs. You know what that means. And they're biting. And I hope we don't get to the point where we do.
The Kremlin, too, has shared that Moscow is ready to negotiate, but it has warned that Russia will not warm up to ultimatums. Interestingly, the NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte has echoed the US president. This as the US-NATO weapons purchasing scheme has just been hatched between Donald Trump and Mark Rutte. With Trump declaring that the Patriot missile defense systems should arrive in Ukraine very soon, despite resistance from some high-profile figures in the MAGA movement who oppose US support for Ukraine. But Kiev has reasons to celebrate as Washington resumes military assistance to Ukraine. On expected lines, the NATO chief has warned that Brazil, China and India could be hit very hard by secondary sanctions. That is, if they continued to do business with Russia. And so Rutte has urged Russia's BRICS allies, India, Brazil and China, to make that phone call to Putin on an urgent basis, only to escape the sanctions.
If you are the president of China, or the prime minister of India, or the president of Brazil, and you are still trading with the Russians and getting the oil and the gas in, and you sometimes even resell it for a higher price, know that if this guy in Moscow doesn't get serious about peace talks, I will slam secondary sanctions on you of 100%. So I'm sure they don't know yet what hit them.
Now remember, countries that stand to lose are Russia's allies and mostly partner nations of BRICS. So much so, India and China have become the top two destinations for Russian oil. And India alone currently imports about 1.6 to 1.7 million barrels per day. That's around 35% of India's daily oil needs. Though not a major buyer of Russian oil and energy, South Africa does import some goods from Russia. And that includes cereals, mineral fuels, inorganic chemicals and salt. Brazil, a major agricultural economy, is one of the largest buyers of Russian fertilizers, and that's a key input for its production of soybeans, sugar and coffee. In West Asia, the United Arab Emirates, a significant BRICS member, functions as a financial conduit for Russian energy transactions. Dubai may not be a primary consumer of Russian oil, but it has become a financial sanctuary for Russian capital and oligarch wealth. Another BRICS member, Vietnam too, maintains energy and defense ties with Moscow. Interestingly, Turkey, a NATO member, remains heavily reliant on Russian fossil fuels, and that includes both crude oil and natural gas. It should be noted that Trump has been targeting BRICS ever since the Rio summit concluded. Whether it was the BRICS' joint declaration condemning US airstrikes on Iran or Donald Trump's rising tariffs, the US president has been warning BRICS nations against de-dollarization too. The result? Trump's tariff tirade continues. And the latest threat of sanctions is not just to bring Moscow to the talking table, but also challenge a grouping like BRICS that represents emerging economies and the global south. Not to forget, it's a heavy counterweight to the G7. The timing stands out even more so after NATO's choreographed commitment to raise their annual defense budget to 5% of national income within a decade. The perfect tribute to the US president, who, as we all know, is prone to flattery. Business ties with Russia may become a challenge for India, which is already walking the diplomatic tightrope between an Indo-Pacific grouping of the Quad and an anti-West grouping like the BRICS. Similar will be the challenge for Turkey, a key NATO member. But NATO has made it amply clear that there can be no return to business as usual. This until Russia demonstrates compliance with international law and obligations. As for Donald Trump, ganging up with NATO against Russia and the BRICS is a remarkable shift in strategy, one that reflects a judgment that Europe is a better client for the United States than the Kremlin.